So last week we wrapped up with Yom Kippur or Day of Atonement. So we saw this kind of from Yom Teruah, the Feast of Trumpets, which would have been like what some would see as kind of the New Year or one of the New Years at least. We're waiting for that first little crescent of the new moon, and then from there 10 days of awe to Yom Kippur, which would be Day of Atonement. And then that brings us to Sukkot, which is Feast of Tabernacles, and that will be 5 days after Yom Kippur. And where Yom Teruah and Yom Kippur are just one day, Sukkot would be a 7 day festival or feast. And so Sukkot literally means booths or huts or tent, so it's kind of like a hut or a tent. Beginning on the 15th day of the seventh month, so Tishri 15 at sundown, is when Sukkot would begin, or rather Tishri 14 at sundown. I should have put because the beginning of Tishri, which would be sundown the 14th. Now, Feast of Tabernacles is based on Leviticus 23:33 to 43. I want this to go away. Okay. Where it says, the Lord said to Moses, say to the Israelites, on the 15th day of the seventh month, the Lord's festival of tabernacles begins, and it lasts for 7 days. The first day is a sacred assembly. Do no regular work. For 7 days, present food offerings to the Lord. And on the 8th day, so mind you, this is like a 7+1 holiday, right? As it says 7 days, right? But then there's this +1, the 8th day. On the 8th day, hold a sacred assembly and present a food offering to the Lord. It is the closing special assembly. Do no regular work. These are the Lord's appointed festivals, which you are to proclaim as sacred assemblies for bringing food offering to the Lord, the burnt offerings and grain offerings, sacrifices and drink offerings required for each day. These offerings are in addition to those for the Lord's Sabbaths, and in addition to your gifts and whatever you have vowed, and all the free will offerings you give to the Lord. So beginning with the 15th day of the seventh month, after you have gathered the crops of the land, celebrate the festival to the Lord for 7 days. The first day is a day of Sabbath rest, and the 8th day also is a day of Sabbath rest. On the first day, you are to take branches from luxuriant trees, from palms, willows, and other leafy trees, and rejoice before the Lord your God for 7 days. Celebrate this as a festival to the Lord for 7 days each year. This is to be a lasting ordinance for the generations to come. Celebrate it in the 7th month. Live in temporary shelters for 7 days. All native-born Israelites are to live in such shelters. So your descendants will know that I had the Israelites live in temporary shelters when I brought them out of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. And we'll see later in Numbers and in Deuteronomy where there are other instructions, especially as it pertains to the sacrifices that are conducted during Sukkot. So Sukkot is another pilgrimage festival. So for those traveling to Jerusalem, they would plan to arrive prior to Tishri 15 so they may prepare for the festivities. So prior to Tishri 15, Hebrews would build sukkahs, and these are a booth or a hut, right? This is a temporary shelter made of natural materials like branches, sticks, and leaves. And some of them will make it so that the ceiling the sky is still visible through the ceiling. So they'll build a structure, a hut with sticks and leaves, and cover the top of it as long as the sky is still visible. Honestly, I was trying to figure out why that was important. I couldn't really narrow it down. And the Bible doesn't really specify that it should be that way, but for today's Jews, that's how they would. So this is something that's still observed and practiced today. They'll go out into the wilderness or even their backyard. They'll collect, maybe from the neighborhood or whatever, sticks and leaves and branches and build these sukkahs.
In New York and some of the big cities, they do it on their balconies.
Is that right?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Cool.
That's pretty cool.
So, I mean, they don't have,
The wilderness, but
Yeah.
they're outside. and
yeah,
it's
on the balcony.
Yeah, a temporary structure. That's pretty cool. Yeah, there are big festivals that they'll have in certain states. I want to say like Texas is one of them, where there'll be like thousands of people and they all come for Sukkot, and they'll have their little temporary structures and built all around. So it'll be more communal in that regard, which I thought was pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, if you're in a concrete jungle, you do what you got to do, right? So for 1 week, Hebrews live in these temporary shelters while celebrating Sukkot. The purpose of this is to illustrate how Israel dwelled in temporary shelters after the Exodus from Egypt. It's not so legalistic that every waking moment they're in these shelters, but they'll sleep there, they'll eat there. All right, we'll kind of talk about that. It's not forbidden for us for them to go indoors or to use the restroom or whatever the case may be. But for the most part, it's they'll spend a lot of their time within these sukkahs over those 7 days. Kind of like camping, right? If you go camping, you're hanging out mostly in the tent. So the first day of Sukkot is a high Sabbath. No regular work is done, and a holy convocation is held. So the people would gather at the temple, and sacrifices would be conducted based on God's instruction given in Numbers 29:12-16. So again, now we're going to Numbers. So on the 15th day of the 7th month, hold a sacred assembly and do no regular work. Celebrate a festival to the Lord for 7 days. Present as an aroma pleasing to the Lord a food offering consisting of a burnt offering of 13 young bulls, 2 rams and 14 male lambs, a year old, all without defect. With each of the 13 bulls, offer a grain offering for 3/10 of an ephah of the finest flour mixed with oil. With each of the 2 rams, 2/10, and with each of the 14 lambs, 1/10. Include 1 male goat as a sin offering, in addition to the regular burnt offering with its grain offering and drink offering. That's just the first day. And we'll see the same thing every day of Sukkot, except for that, the bull offering, right? So this where it says, pleasing to the Lord, burnt offering 13 young bulls. So that you'll see decrease each day that we progress within Sukkot. So the first day there's 13. And I'll kind of show you guys the breakdown here in just a moment. The rest of these are going to be pretty uniform. So the 13 young bulls is the only thing that you'll kind of see a fluctuation in. But the 2 rams, 14 male lambs a year old, all without defect, and so on, those you'll see consistent. But the bulls in particular are what you'll see will decrease for every day that goes on. So all in all, there would be 70 bulls sacrificed during Sukkot. Each day there would be a decreased amount sacrificed based on God's instruction given in Numbers 29:12-39. So each of those days there's a new instruction. So day 1 there would be 13 bulls, day 2 would be 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, and then day 7 would be 7 bulls. Now on the 8th day, that plus 1 day, there would be 1 bull sacrificed. So the traditional explanation, especially in the later Jewish interpretation, is that the 70 bulls correspond to the 70 nations of the world. And so this is going to go back to Genesis, where if we look at the account of Noah and his sons and how they were kind of separated out in the world. This is just before the Tower of Babel, how there were these 70 nations. So in Genesis 10, the table of nations, humanity is symbolically divided into 70 nations. So during Sukkot, Israel wasn't just offering sacrifices for themselves, but on behalf of all humanity. Sukkot carries a universal theme where it's not just about Israel, it's about all nations being sustained and blessed. And again, if we go back to what is told to Abraham, it's like through you all nations are going to be blessed, right? Not just Israel. And so we kind of see some of that here as well, where now again, the Bible doesn't specifically say that this is what we're doing with these 70 bulls. It's more what they've kind of put together in looking at things historically. And so, okay, we have these 70 bulls. So to them, that representation is those 70 nations that were identified in Genesis, or the table of nations in Genesis 10. The decreasing number of bulls may also symbolize a drawing down of divine provision to the nations, a gradual transition towards the final sacred assembly. And then on the 8th day, only one bull is offered. Rabbinic interpretation often sees this as a shift from universal 70 nations to a more intimate relationship between God and Israel. And remember, whenever we talk about Israel, we're talking about us, right? We're not just talking about those that were born to Israel. The New Testament is clear that we are sons and daughters of Israel because of Christ. And so, again, that kind of goes back to, them, at least Jews feeling like we're kind of jacking their culture. But and it's not really us jacking their culture. We've been grafted in, following that path from the first covenants all the way to Christ, and then how this new covenant we're now adopted in. Jews that don't believe in Christ obviously stop at that part, right? There's no acknowledgement of this new covenant. And so otherwise they would be included in that, right? All you've got to do is accept Christ. And it doesn't matter if you're Jew or Gentile. But in this regard, Israel for Jews would be just for people that are of the Jewish faith, you would say. Or even if they don't follow the Jewish faith, they're entitled based on their bloodline, their lineage as an Israelite or from the tribe of one of the 12 tribes of Israel, even if they can't identify which tribe that is. Good questions or comments, insight? Okay, good. So over the course of the 7-day festival, Hebrews would eat meals, read Torah, and sleep in the sukkah, or the tent, right? This hut. A constant reminder of dependence on God. Families, servants, Levites, strangers would all rejoice before God with music, dancing, and feasting. So each day except the Sabbath, people would gather and wave palm branches, what they call lulav, myrtle, hadaz, willow, araba, and citron, which etrog. For those that don't have these particular, types of branches or plants, they're going to just whatever is in the area, they're going to collect and wave those while in the sukkah. So this represents joy, harvest, and unity of the people. So this would be something that would come. No, I'm getting ahead of myself. So at the temple, priests drew water from the pool of Siloam and poured it on the altar with wine, symbolizing rain for the coming year, a dependence on God for provision. So this part right here was actually something that was introduced after the building of the second temple. So this part, obviously, specifically the pool of Siloam, would be in Jerusalem. So if you're in the wilderness, you're obviously not doing this. But even during the first temple, before the first temple was destroyed, they weren't doing this. Something that was introduced into their culture after the rebuilding of the second temple. This, similar to what we saw with Yom Teruah and Yom Kippur, these are coming at the end of the harvest, right? Because we're looking at like a 15-day period from Yom Teruah to now. To Sukkot. So this is all kind of this harvest festival. So we're going to see a lot of these things that are relevant or akin to the end of the harvest festival. Less in Sukkot, but so not as much as we saw with like the wave offering of like grain during Yom Teruah, or even back to Pesach, where we saw the wave offering for or barley and then grain. So we're not seeing the wave offerings in that regard, but that's more like, okay, we're still in the harvest. This is now like the end of that harvest, where in some of those other seasons, we're still kind of towards the tail end of those harvest seasons. Now this is, we're completely out of the harvest, but it's still kind of a harvest festival, in some regard. And that's why we'll see a lot of prayers for things like for the coming year harvest and rain and what have you. And that's why we see this with the water for the pool, from the pool of Siloam, poured out on the altar, which symbolizes rain for the coming year. So the 2nd through 6th day of Sukkot are not considered Shabbat. They're not Sabbaths, right? You can do regular work, but there are still daily sacrifices. So, and really what you'd see is you wouldn't necessarily see regular work where you would be going to work and doing your job because you're, living in this like temporary shelter. You're actually taking this time off of work, but you're still able to prepare food and things like that. So you wouldn't see, although most people that celebrate Sukkot, this is these 2nd through 6th day aren't these Shabbat or Sabbath where you can't do any regular work. You still will see that they traditionally won't, right? They're kind of setting this time apart away from work, but not doing regular work means that they can do things like prepare meals and things that you wouldn't normally be able to do on Shabbat. So on the 2nd day, offer 12 young bulls. So again, we went from 13 to 12, right? Young bulls, 2 rams, and 14 male lambs, a year old, all without defect. With the bulls, rams, and lambs offer their grain offerings and drink offerings according to the number specified, including 1 male goat as sin offering, in addition to the regular burnt offerings with its grain offering and their drink offerings. So these 5 days repeat a simple ancient pattern. So we'll see these same things occur throughout the 2nd and 6th day. So in the mornings, begin the day in the Sukkah with prayer and Torah reading. Face different directions while waving the 4 types of branches. Acknowledge God over all the earth. Midday, you'd eat meals in the Sukkah. Reflect or rest in the afternoon. That sounds awesome. Teach children about this feast. And then in the evenings, eat and enjoy meals in the Sukkah, light candles or lanterns, sing, celebrate, and tell stories. And so this would be something that would be repetitious throughout each of these days, with the exception of how many bulls are sacrificed each day. So we can already see on the 2nd day, now we're down to 12, where the 1st day we're at 13. And of course, the 3rd day we'll see 11, and so on and so forth, until we get to the 7th day, which will be 7 bulls. And then the 8th day, which will just be 1 bull. Good. Any thoughts or questions?
Could I just add?
Yes.
One of the things that I love about Sukkot is this is the only, that I can find. It appears that this is the only time where God commands you to celebrate and be happy. For an 8-day period, you are commanded, not suggested, but literally commanded to party and be happy.
Yeah.
Smile.
Yeah.
Don't you?
Right. Don't do it. No, and you see that it's like, and everyone's commanded to. Whether you're a visitor, you're a slave, you're non-Jewish, non-Israelite, you're commanded. If you're within our community, you're commanded to celebrate. Otherwise, you're going to be put out, right? It's like, you're going to be a party pooper, you got to go away from us. Yeah, it is commanded that we celebrate, that we are joyous.
It's so weird to stop work. Everybody stop work.
Right.
Just be a spectacular.
And,
Nobody's working.
right. It would be a testament to our putting our money where our mouth is, right? To coin a phrase, because if we rely on God's provision, then we're not worried about taking a week off, or much less like this day, and then 10 days later, this day. Imagine telling your boss that, well, I need this day off, but then in 10 days, I'm this day off. Well, let's back up for a second. Soon, I don't know which days, right? Depends on when the new moon, but when I see that, then I'll be able to tell you I need these days off. right? And then after I have this day and this day, and by the way, the Sabbaths, I'm gonna need all those off. But then on this day, the 15th of Tishri, I'm gonna need a week off. Right? So, but it's a testament to it would be a testament to their devotion to God being their provider and them not being concerned about providing for themselves. Otherwise, that would be a stressor, right? And it says in the Bible, it says, and we've read in some of these holidays that the Sabbath specifically is meant to be joyous, right? But I think entering into that is a chore for us, right? For it to become joyous. I don't think it automatically is. It's hard for us to put down our lives or our responsibilities for a whole day, much less a whole week, and find it joyous and not stressful. And so, yeah, but I mean, great point, right? It's like,
I remember when they made a new holiday recently, they were talking about how much billions of dollars they'll lose, cost the economy. That's all we think about, bottom line, and I'm like, here, it's the whole nation.
yeah,
Because they trust God.
absolutely, absolutely. And you see some of that watered down, obviously, over time, especially with how we're looking at the what do they call it? The postponements, right? Where it's like, well, we don't want to interrupt, regular daily things, so we're gonna have to postpone. If we see the moon on this day, it's not gonna work out because the year's gonna be too long, or we're gonna have too many back-to-back Sabbaths or what have you. So later you start to see that there's like these postponements. But it's kind of akin to how we structure holidays in the US, right? It's like, we're gonna have holidays at these certain times of the year because that's what's best for the bottom line. Takes you from the
4th of July is on Monday, we're gonna celebrate it Saturday.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Thanksgiving on Thursday, so we can have a long
That's
weekend.
right.
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's interesting. And a lot of it goes back to consumerism, right? And making sure that we get from the red to the black. That's why we see these Black Friday sales, which is no longer Black Friday, it's like Black November, right? Yeah, it's just a whole month now. All right, so the seventh day of Sukkot is called Hoshana Rabbah, which means great salvation or many deliverances. So this is a special day of intensified prayers. Priests would circle the altar multiple times as people prayed for salvation and rain for the coming seasons. This would be the final day and night spent in the Sukkah. Hebrews would have extended prayer time and ask for provision, rain, and deliverance. Sukkot is celebrated at the end of harvest season, so there would be a sense of thankfulness for crops, wine, and oil. There would be intense prayer for the coming season as we're reminded that provisions come from God alone. So I think that's awesome. That's really powerful. Again, just kind of back to what we were just talking about is that that's an acknowledgement that God provides, right? If there's famine, that's God at work, right? If there's abundance, that's God at work, and it's all for a purpose, it's all for a reason. And so, in this time where it's like we just had this great abundance, we don't forget that abundance came from God and will continue to come from God. Where you can see sometimes, and I think it's a struggle for a lot of people that when you get to a certain place, especially financially, you start to feel like you can do it for yourself, right? You start to make that separation from trusting and relying on God, because now you feel somehow empowered that you've got enough resources that you can go it alone. Even if we don't think it consciously, sometimes I think subconsciously we start to make decisions and choices because of our abundance, feeling like the reins are off, right? It's like, okay, the world is my oyster. I've got all of these resources I can, go forth and conquer. And obviously it's not acknowledging that God should set our path, right? And not us just go off nonchalantly feeling like we have the ability and resources to be able to do what it is that we want. And so this is like a stark reminder, because even if you had this great harvest, right, and you're coming off of this like feeling of joy and excitement because you had this huge harvest, you're still humbling yourself and saying, God, thank you for what you provided. And Lord, we just pray that you continue to provide into the future. So I think it's a humbling and awesome opportunity to recenter and refocus on who the provider is, and putting themselves in this very humble position, right? Like going away from what did somebody say once? Only in America do we spend money to live like a homeless person because we go out camping, you know? We spend all this money to go out and camp and to live like a homeless person. It's kind of what it reminds me of, though, right? Because you're kind of separating yourself from all the pleasantries and luxuries that God has given us to a more humble, situation, as a reminder that this is God had us in this situation at one point. And I'm sure that all of us can attest at some point in our lives, God has had us in something similar, right? Obviously not like maybe not living in a tent on the street, I'm sure for some, but at least for me, I've been blessed enough to not have to have been in that situation. But still in our own regard, without the things that we may have today, or some of us may still be in that situation. But it is important to understand that when we're following God, even in those situations, God has us there, right? It's not like it went over his head. He's like, oh, I forgot about you, right? It's like whatever situation we're in. I heard somebody say one time, if it wasn't for the disciples following Christ, they never would have been in the storm on that boat, right? So God puts us in these situations is always for our betterment. All the disciples that died a horrible death, if it wasn't for following God, they wouldn't have died those terrible deaths. God has a purpose for those things, right? We trust and rely on him to guide our lives. And if that's the end that he wants us to come to, then so be it, right? If we decide that he is the Most High, he is our God, and we'll do as he requests, then so be it. Do with what you will in life, right? And obviously it's easier said than done, especially when you're facing persecution or worse persecution on your spouse or your children. And we can say that someday we may face that, but the fact of the matter is there are people right now today that are facing it. They have been facing that for generations, right? We're just blessed to live in the U.S. where we don't have to deal with that, but it doesn't mean that our fellow brother and sister aren't dealing with that and aren't getting killed or imprisoned or their families getting killed because they chose Christ. So it's always important to, I think, I know, at least for me, is to remain humble in knowing that God sets my path, and anytime I get this notion in my brain that I can do something without him, I'm just grateful that he is gracious and merciful enough to correct me. No matter how harsh that correction is, put back in line. We were just out with some friends, so we just took a trip and we were blessed because we didn't have to pay for any of it. The company that was sent us to Cancun. It was awesome. Had a great time. But we see that who we were before and who we are now, we're separated. So we go to these restaurants and we're hanging out with this rowdy crowd, and when I mean rowdy, I mean like dancing on the tables and drinking bottles and splashing things around, right? Rowdy. And we're kind of like that. Unfortunately, it used to be us, right? We used to be in that mix, and now we're kind of set back from that. And it's interesting how the people that are drawn to us are similar and like-minded, right? Like they'll kind of, they'll find the corner that we're in, right? And I acknowledge that we're somehow different than what's happening. Not to say better or worse or anything, but just we're set apart, we're different, right? And sure enough, it's because of our love for Christ. The conversation is always directed in that place, and we see that we're like-minded in that way, and that's kind of why we can be in the midst of that, but not be a part of it, right? And sometimes it's awkward, right? Sometimes it's like, hey, do we really need to come to this? But it's also good that we can be in the midst and still be separated, but also have the light of Christ that shines out of us so that people are drawn to us. We can have those conversations with people. But also creates an opportunity for people to see that you can be a part of this, but not, or be in the midst of this, but not be, yeah, not take part in the debauchery, you know? Yeah, and so it's, I thank God that, you know, it's been, it'll be 6 years, and this year, from this month for me, and next month for Candace, that we drink, and we can be in the midst of that and not be tempted to want to take a drink or partake or what have you. But it's interesting also, even the ones that do, and, you know, are, you know, getting all crazy and dancing on tables and acting a fool, they'll find us and, you know, somehow try to, what's the word?
Invite you.
Convince us that this is just a show, right? I had a guy that comes up to me and he says, you know, this is all show, none of this matters. He says, what matters is when we die and we go and see Christ. And I appreciated that, right? But it's like, right, but how I live and conduct myself today it matters as well, right? But it's interesting to see that separation, because where before you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between us and them. We would be the same. We would be in the mix of all of that. And now I just thank God that He has set us apart, that you can obviously see the difference. That, and again, it's not for better or for worse. We're just set apart. We're just separated from that to the extent that we stick out, right? And obviously, no one's rude about it. Matter of fact, everyone was really kind to us. But they can see that it's not really our scene.
God uses us in strange ways, don't He?
Absolutely.
And you don't even know sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah, you never know who's watching. You never know who's.
It's not who's watching. It's God just uses us in the right place at the right time sometimes.
Absolutely.
And we don't even know it.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. Okay, where are we? So let's see, special day of intense prayer. Okay, so this would be the final day and night spent in the Sukkah. Hebrews would have extended prayer time and asked for provisions, rain, and deliverance. Sukkot is celebrated at the end of harvest. So we talked about this as well season. So there would be a sense of thankfulness for crops, wine, and oil. There would be intense prayer for the coming season as a reminder the provision comes from God alone. Day 8 is called Shemini Azeret, which means the 8th day of assembly. Though technically separate, it immediately follows Sukkot, right? Because we're talking about the 7 days of Sukkot, where we've got the first day, the Holy Convocation, we're residing in the Sukkahs, and then the next 6 days as well. This 8th day, now so this is another day of Holy Convocation and Shabbat, so no regular work, of course, but Hebrews are no longer dwelling in their Sukkahs. A closing gathering at the temple ensues with daily offerings, and the feast comes to a close. So we're still having these daily offerings. Again, all of those other things that were offered for burnt offerings and drink offering, voluntary offerings and so on are still ensuing. The only difference, again, is going to be that bull. The bull now is down to just one. So we went from 7 bulls the previous day now just to one. One bull would be sacrificed on this 8th day. And this kind of brings everything to a close. Obviously we're not residing for this day in the Sukkah, but we're still full on celebrating Sukkot, or rather this 8th day. Good. Any questions or comments?
Question?
Yeah.
Because if they were out in the wilderness or whatever,
Yeah.
how did they get home before the Sabbath and prepare for, because isn't this day a Sabbath?
Yes. So there is so we got to go back to the first day of Tishri, which would be Yom Teruah, the Feast of Trumpets. So they have what's called postponement rules.
Okay.
And so if you have, and there's 4 major postponement rules. And the idea to these postponements is if the first day of the new year, we'll call it, when we first see that crescent in the moon, is going to disrupt the following feasts and make it so they're back-to-back Sabbaths, for example. So if this day were to land on a Friday or a Sunday, then there would be a postponement. So that you wouldn't have Shabbat and then a Shabbat. Otherwise, things would pile up like dead bodies or what have you, that you wouldn't be able to handle or other things. So going to this day then, if it's going to be let's say this day is gonna land on a Monday, then no problem. That means that your next Shabbat is not gonna be for 6 days. Now, if it is going to be maybe like a Thursday, and that means that you'll have Friday and then you'll have Saturday Shabbat, and you can't necessarily travel, then you would likely just stay in place. You would just stay wherever you are. That way it wouldn't disrupt your regular Shabbat. Yeah, good question. And it's something that,
There, in the scripture, there's this idea of the law of first mention.
Mhm.
So the first time the word Sukkot is used in Genesis 33, where Jacob's making, and you probably, did you?
go ahead. No, I haven't touched on this yet.
All right.
We will, but go ahead.
Oh, all right.
No, please, go ahead.
Right. So that's the first time that it's mentioned. And it's about an animal shelter. So the sukkah that I'm gonna make isn't gonna be some elaborate thing, and some people do make elaborate, but it's made as a temporary shelter.
Yep.
That's what its purpose is for. And I think that's the main thing that I wanted to cover on it is when we study the scripture, that rule of first mention, if I want to know what something means, then I can go to where that particular word's first used.
Yeah.
And it will often give me a great definition of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so I'm slow, and so it helps me when I'm studying to be able to go back.
Absolutely.
And
And the Bible clearly states, in Numbers, how it's to be built. Like for them in their area where there are these things in nature, there are specific types of trees and branches that God wanted these to be built out of. Obviously, if you look somewhere where they don't have, they're not native to that area, then the cultures evolved to a place where whatever's in nature, right, sticks and twigs and branches. But yeah, you're not putting up brick and mortar. We're not using anything. So it's basically things that you find in nature. But yeah, some of them can get really elaborate.
And for me, see, I'm modified, so I appreciate that you say that modification. I set up a tent and then cut some limbs that needed to be trimmed off of my trees and put them on the edges of it. And so really I'm in a tent, but
So all these animal sacrifices are fully burnt, right?
Mhm.
Well, that must have been tremendous amount of preparation that's the part that amazes me. Talk about burning 13 bulls and goats, and
Right.
I can't imagine the preparation that had to go into that ahead of time.
Absolutely. And you think about, and that's not it, right? Because if we have a family of people, thousands of families, right, and they're bringing their burnt sacrifices on top of the daily, and then the festival sacrifices. I just wonder how hot these these altars had to be able to burn that down, right? That's always perplexed me as well. It's like, man, you had to be cooking. Like, how is it that you fit all of that in a day, only for the next day to do it again?
Yeah.
I know today, if we wanted to do that to an animal, we could put it in a furnace, and we've got natural gas or what have you to be able to heat it up. But I mean, back then it's just sticks and fire, so and then some air, right? So I can't even imagine, what that would look like. Although if we looked at, what was it, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when they were put in the fiery furnace, right when that furnace opened, like that fire that blew out were killing guards. So I'm sure they figured out how to make fire really hot, but even then, I mean, to be able to burn all of that up so that it's not just stacking up, then you got to get it to ash.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's wild. Yeah, I have no idea. The logistics on that blow my mind. So ancient Sukkot would have been a national gathering a harvest festival and a spiritual reset. It's a joyful celebration of provision and protection. Protection is important. We'll kind of revisit that. Thousands of families camping in and around Jerusalem, singing, eating, worshiping, and remembering their ancestors' journey. So again, this would be a pilgrimage. So again, if they were there as part of the pilgrimage and they knew that there was a Sabbath coming, not enough time to get back home, they're likely just to hang around. Sukkot is a reminder that life is fragile and dependent on God for provision. Joy is commanded, not optional. It's a time to remember history, especially the Exodus, and it's a time for community and the notion that no one celebrates alone. Okay, good. I wanted to make sure we got through all of that. So yeah, we do see that it is something that is not optional, something that was commanded, right? It's like you're going to party, right? You're going to celebrate. So that's a really cool. And this is not the only one where we see that commandment. We saw that with trying to remember specifically. There was another festival that we saw that where it's like everybody is commanded to celebrate, to sing, right? To dance and to be joyous. Like if whether slave or foreigner or visitor, whoever it may be, everyone's commanded on this day to celebrate and sing. So we see that consistently throughout some of these festivals as well. Okay, good. Before we wrap up, any questions or additional comments?
Historically, to me, when you say protection, I think of, wow, what a vulnerability for a nation to do this.
Yeah.
Because anybody who knew their culture is like, well, if I want to attack them, this is the week to do it.
Yeah, right.
And they have.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I was
On
asking.
modern tech days, they have done that multiple times.
Interesting. Okay.
So I love to connect dots. And one of my connecting of the dots is, it's interesting that during Sukkot, we're commanded to live in an animal shelter. And the King of Kings is going to be born in an animal shelter. So if I'm connecting dots, then I could go, maybe, just maybe, I could figure out when he's born, but that's not the main point. The main point is that we're commanded to go basic, and the very king of the universe was born in a sukkah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, absolutely. And there is, so it's symbolic of, well, so I don't want to go into too much, but it's symbolic of entering into God's protection. And so if we're behind fortified cities, we feel like we're protecting ourselves, right? Think of Gideon, right? If Gideon went out with all of his men and would have conquered, then the Bible says that they would have been able to take credit for it. But when we enter into God's protection, it goes beyond sticks and leaves, right? So it doesn't matter what's around us, right? So we'll kind of touch on that a little bit. And there's also some parallels between that and the marriage, like the traditional ancient Hebrew ceremonies and the process from after you're married and go out into a sukkah, or well, it wasn't a sukkah, but it was like a tent where you would go into the covering of your husband and then you would consummate. Which I think it's kind of awkward, right? Because you have all your friends and family around, and you're like, I'm gonna go into this tent and we're gonna make a baby. That's just kind of weird to me. I don't know. But all right, guys, I think we're over time. So we'll pick back up next week.
Different than the US culture.
Oh, by a mile.